Cameras, lights, cam, truth in view. Black actors lead, now it's on you. Jamila's got the mic, let's go! Real leaders, welcome to the show!
This is Real Leadership, leadership lessons from film, feeds, and the front lines of life with your host, Jamila Chambers, featuring Dr. Robin Miles. We are so excited for you to join us for this episode as we examine the Apple Plus documentary, #1 on the call sheet, featuring leadership lessons from Black actors in Hollywood. Prepare to talk about mentorship, coaching, life skills, and what you need from the boardroom to the classroom to help support you in your endeavors. Let's learn from these Black actors in this discussion with Dr. Robin Miles.
Jamila's got the mic, let's go.
Welcome. I am so excited to share conversation and dialogue with you as we kick off this episode of Real Leaders, leadership lessons from film, feeds, and the front lines of life. My name is Jamila Chambers, and I am so excited to be in conversation with Dr. Robin Miles today. And Dr. Robin and I are going to do a bit of a deep dive in a new Apple TV Plus documentary called #1 on the Call Sheet. There are 2 episodes that are currently posted on Apple Plus. We have no affiliation unless they call us, holler at us, but we have no affiliation with Apple Plus. We just simply saw that documentary was posted and was available and got excited about leadership principles that we could extract from that documentary. So, Dr. Robin, before we get into that content, let's share with those that are watching and those that are listening just a little bit of how you and I got on this call today. We were sitting in my living room in Los Angeles literally a week ago and said, we need to drop a mic into this conversation. How do we get on the call today? And why is it so important, especially now, for folks to be in community and be in community discussing leadership?
Yeah, I mean, when we both kind of clued into this topic, #1 on the call sheet, I know that I first heard about it on a podcast a long time ago where some of the cast members from the TV show Scandal that starred Kerry Washington, they were talking about, how Kerry led the team. And they mentioned this term, #1 on the call sheet. And I thought, wow, I've never heard that term before. And they explained how she took the helm, created the culture and the environment there, and really supported their cast with coming together, collaborating, and being on one accord regarding how they would comport themselves on the set. So during our conversation, we kind of all clued in, you, myself, and Rufus, on this wonderful TV show documentary that was coming up. And we thought, hey, we got to talk a little bit more about this and really point out some of the leadership aspects as I anticipated that they would actually point out during the show. So yeah, that's how we came about.
And I love it. And we are literally, for those that are watching and listening, dropping a microphone into a decades-long conversation that Robin and I have been having about leadership, about the importance of leadership. Dr. Robin is literally one of my personal mentors and coaches and an expert in the field, and just so excited to continue to have this conversation publicly. And hopefully, as you drop some of those gems and nuggets, there will be some folks that'll be able to pick them up along the way.
Absolutely.
This particular project was directed by Reginald Hudlin. And Reginald Hudlin and the Hudlin brothers are really known in the film industry, have been pioneers in a lot of ways in the genre and taking the genre to another level. And this documentary really opens with focusing on storytelling and the importance of storytelling from a leadership perspective. So as we get into the topics today, and as we start to talk about leadership in particular, how
Mhm.
important is just telling the story
Mm,
about how we started, how we began,
mhm.
the story about overcoming our triumphs, the stories of our failures. How important is just storytelling in general, from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, storytelling is extremely important. It's how we pass down some of our lessons learned, the wisdom that we gained along the way, some of the failures that we've had, right? You shouldn't be ashamed of
Mhm.
failures because through failures we have discoveries, right? And leadership has a reputation sometimes of not really harnessing those stories, which is why we have to have documentaries like this that we can collate and collect those stories and showcase them in a way that's powerful and that supports that next generation for with you know not making the same mistakes maybe that we had, or at least learning from the mistakes that we made as well as our successes, right? So storytelling is super important in leadership, and I think we need to do a lot more of it.
You mentioned just a few moments ago that you had never heard that term number one on the call sheet. That was
Yeah.
not a term that I was familiar with as well.
Mhm.
Um, to go back just a week to our private conversation in the living room, one
Mhm.
of the things that you and I talked about was there was a time and a place in a work environment, and it did not matter your industry or your trade, that
Mhm.
there was an expectation that you would have an apprenticeship type of process,
Mhm.
that you would start off from a ground level, that you would work your way up, that you would take the opportunity to come into a field and into a space as a novice, and
Yeah.
then learn from those that were there
Mhm.
and transition that learning into being a journeyman, so to speak, and then sharing that knowledge with others along the way.
Mhm.
You and I talked about some of the differences and the shifts in that thinking now. And number one on the call sheet, simply for those that haven't seen the documentary yet, it was a term that was unfamiliar to Robin and I because we are not in that business, but it
Right.
was literally about going into a space, whether you're on a set in any capacity, and that was even a lesson for me, whether you are working in front of the camera or behind the camera, and based on your level of engagement with the project, number one on the call sheet meant you were the most engaged. You were the person that had their hands in every part of the project, and typically that was the person with the leading role. And if you
Mhm.
were number 57 on the call sheet, for example, that was a person that might have had not even a single line. You might have been an extra in the scene, or had one line, or had one component that you added. And so that thought of the apprentice,
Yeah.
number 50 something on the call sheet, and the journeyman, the person that had the skills and the experience.
Mhm.
Even within the entertainment industry, you had person after person in that documentary talk about their process, with the exception of Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy said, I was always number one on the call sheet. With the exception of Eddie Murphy,
Right.
everyone from Denzel Washington to oh my goodness, oh, I'm forgetting names just because I'm trying to remember them.
Yeah.
That 50 is kicking in right now. But I was like, I'm gonna remember Don Cheadle, like
Oh
everyone
yeah.
from a Denzel Washington to a Don Cheadle to so many others that were in that documentary talked about that apprenticeship type of process. And
Yes.
so, from a leadership perspective, for those that feel like it's an overnight sensation, what
Mhm.
can we extract from, say, being 50 plus on the call sheet to being number one on the call sheet?
Yeah, I think that, where you are on the hierarchy, right? It does matter and it should matter. Similar to in the film industry, in for-profit organizations, we have a hierarchy as well. And we also have a concept called succession planning, right? Which means that you are forethinking who you would want to groom to take over leadership roles. And I think that concept replaced kind of the older school apprenticeship, right? Which was a formalized program within the trades. And so, it's important for us to kind of hold up that person who is at the helm, because they should be responsible for making sure that they pave the way for those who come after them. And I think that is a theme that I heard, at least throughout the whole entire first series of the documentary, where the men were really sharing how, the responsibility that they felt and they took on of creating, kind of a standard for that role, setting the tone for the cast, for every person who was working on the set. And I think that leading by example is such a critical part of, I would say, ensuring that you are passing down those wisdoms and making sure that you are supporting those who are coming up behind you with harnessing the skills and the abilities and the mindsets that they need in order to really, take on your shoes when it's their opportunity, right? Because of course they're going to have their shot. And like, I think Kevin Hart was one that said, he's like, I want to be ready. So I'm going to be a student. I'm going to be a student of those who are in that number one sheet and in that number one spot, right? And true to form, he did that. He paid attention. He made sure he honed his craft. He made sure that he also identified specific actors that he wanted to emulate. Right? He studied their pathways, the way in which they comported themselves, how they handled themselves, and patterned his behaviors off of that. So I think that, like, when we talk about apprenticeships or successionships, we have to think about it in a two-pronged approach. It's not just about the leader, right, who is setting the tone and doing what they need to do to kind of pave the way for those to come behind them, but there's a responsibility also for those who are lower on the totem pole to make sure that they're doing their job to hone their skills and to pattern their behaviors and craft after those who they want to emulate.
And this documentary had 100% Black actors. And
Yes.
so everyone in this documentary was a Black actor. And I believe it was Ice Cube and several others that talked about specifically the challenge of being a Black actor in the space. Kevin Hart said, all of the responsibility falls on you. If it is a success, then it is a success. But if it's a failure, there has to be a scapegoat and a place for that failure to go.
Yeah.
And there was a conversation that was a throughput around legacy. With a Denzel Washington saying, I was chasing a Sidney Poitier, and a Sidney Poitier saying, I was chasing a Paul Robeson or a Hattie McDaniel. And then there was younger actors saying, I was chasing Martin Lawrence, and Martin Lawrence saying, I was chasing Eddie Murphy. And, and you see what I'm saying? And it was there were also several entertainment lawyers and those that kind of work behind the scenes in the documentary as well, and talked about, for as much representation as we think there is in these spaces, the decision makers in Hollywood and those that greenlight projects largely hasn't changed. And quite frankly, because of that, some of the dynamic of always chasing those one or two people to emulate, because there just isn't a plethora of folks in the space.
Right.
Talk a little bit about and boy, does that translate to the world of work. Talk a little bit about what it's like being in places where you might be the first, you might be the only. There
Mhm.
might not be people that look like you doing exactly what you want to do. I love Eddie Murphy said, I was doing rock star stuff on such a large level that everybody from James Brown to everyone else in the industry had no advice to give me because no one had done on
Yeah.
the level as young as I was internationally, the things I was able to accomplish so early in my career.
Yeah.
So talk about particularly for younger Black folks in the workplace and for people of color that might find themselves being the first, the only, and having limited role models and people to emulate. What advice or what should we be talking to them about from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, I was really, one of the questions that I had for myself while I was watching, I was kind of jotting down some notes. I did really get the sense that how the actors were explaining their experiences was very unique to the Black experience or the person of color experience, right? I did think like, wow, I wonder if, folks who are not people of color have these thoughts around responsibility, around accountability to others, and around, being the only. And how that is maybe a foreign concept, right? Even The Rock said, wow, I knew that when I was entering into these spaces, there was no other person of color that I would see. And he talked about, I believe it was Kevin Hart, I want to say. It was one actor that he named that he said, wow, when I met him, as another person of color, he
Jamie
embraced
Foxx.
me.
Jamie Foxx. He was
Jamie
referring to
Foxx,
meeting
yes.
Jamie Foxx.
Thank you. Thank you. It was Jamie Foxx. He said he embraced me. And he compared him to Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and other actors that were kind of in his same realm, of work, doing the action work. How he's like, no, they welcomed me too, right? But when Jamie Foxx opened his arms to me as another person of color, he's like, that really meant something to me. And I think about that in terms of sometimes being the one, the few, the only, how it's easy to get in our heads about it, and also to almost blank it out, like block it all out, and not even clue into that when we're in those positions. But it's so important to be cognizant, right? Especially if you are one of the one and onlys, and to notice when other people of color enter those spaces, and to know that you have like some responsibility as well as you have some power to really make their experience and pathway a little bit more smoother, right, than what yours have been. And I feel like, some of the younger people now, they may not have those experiences as much as, folks in our generation did in terms of like being the one and only as much, right? I think that with social media, it masks some of that loneliness that we may have experienced because the world is so vast. And when they engage on those platforms, I think they have a different feeling of belonging than maybe what happened in our generation, and it still surprises me every time I hear that, another Black person is the first one to do something, the first Black CEO of this industry, or the first Black executive C-suite leader in this industry, or even the first Black, person to graduate with the advanced degree in this particular discipline, right? It still happens. And I think that what I'd love to impart with younger folks is to just notice. Notice that this is happening and try not to take for granted that, I think the social media also gives us this impression that we can be overnight successes. And one of the lessons I really gained from listening to those actors is none of them were overnight successes. They all had paths that, I mean, maybe with the exception of Eddie Murphy. He was
just Eddie
clear.
Murphy. Just Eddie Murphy. Eddie was clear. I came out the gate swinging. I'm still swinging. I love that.
That was ambitious, and I'm sure he had people telling him, "You're crazy." I mean, I think that's a lesson too, right? I think it's a both and thing. Sometimes those are anomalies do happen, but notice that people really have to work at this. It doesn't come overnight, and sometimes you will be one of the only people in this space, in that space, or whatnot. And not to let that deter you, because if you have a dream in your heart, a passion in your heart, then that to me is enough to say, go for it.
And let's talk about some of the humility and vulnerability and discussion around failing your way forward that happened in that film. So you touched on Kevin Hart taking acting lessons and really doing the work. That was after a series of failures. And let's unpack that a little bit. It was not only a series of failures, but it was a series of failures after doing the thing that he thought was going to be the thing, right? How many times?
And then it was going to be the thing, the next thing.
How many times have we in our lives said, oh, this job is going to be the thing that's going to catapult me. And no. Well, this business is going to be the business. And that's going to be the thing. And Kevin said, look, I was already doing stand-up. I had my own show that I was writing and starring in. I had been number one on the call sheet and done movies. And then when I didn't get cast for 40-Year-Old Virgin, and I didn't get the role I thought I got, when I saw the brother who got it, and I know I'm think like a man. I'm gonna have to pull up my cheat sheet. Romney. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing his name right. Yes. But when I saw the brother, he was just so much better than me.
Yeah.
He was just so much like I got it. He was so much better than me.
Right.
So then I had to pivot, and I want to talk to you about that too, because that was an echo too. But I had to pivot and I had to say, I'm going to go do he used to call it comedic rock star stuff. And I need to create this other platform to demonstrate what I can do. And then simultaneously, while I'm doing that, I got to start putting in those reps and acting lessons to get better. And so time after time, person after person shared that level of vulnerability around the work that they had to put in when nobody was looking, when nobody was going, attaboy, attagirl them, where nobody was going to celebrate and applaud.
Right.
After a series of failures, I had to go back in the lab. So what would you say to folks that have found themselves on the other side of whatever they thought was going to be the thing? I thought that was going to be the thing, and had to go back in the lab and come back out and say, I need to refine myself. It really wasn't what I thought it was going to be, but I can't give up on it either.
Yeah.
Talk to folks in that space right now.
Ooh, Jamila. So the first question that came to my mind was, what's the thing? What is the thing? It's like, I think that we look at people who are at the end of their career.
Yes.
And we say, that's the thing, right? And that doesn't even, it's illogical to think that I'm going to wake up one day, have an experience, and then get to the thing, right? I think that to me is one thing to kind of unpack. And that takes some, I think, some support with really outlining what are your dreams? Really, what are your dreams? And also, what are some of the milestones? Because that's something that we don't talk about, right?
Yes.
I don't hear them talk a lot about that, especially in that industry. What are the milestones that will help help to identify you're getting to the thing versus waking up and having the thing, right? And so I think that is worth some conversation, and that's where people like you and I who are in this coaching industry, we get a chance to work with leaders one-on-one on taking that step back and identifying those micro steps that we need to take in order to achieve our ultimate goal. I think that's one thing. I also think that another thing that came up for me is celebrating the state that you're in. Because if we are constantly looking beyond our current state and and only looking out there to the future, we're missing out and foreboding that joy, right? Like Brene Brown talks about, of appreciating and really enjoying where we are in the present day, which means that we may be also overlooking some of those threads, right? Some of those semblances that can actually help us feel like we are getting the thing, right? We're missing out on even appreciating those moments, appreciating those conversations, understanding that there are seasons for everything that we are going through. And so, it was interesting, which I think sometimes, from a spiritual perspective, God says, okay, I need to embed a lesson here for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you're not paying attention to the things that I need you to pay attention to. And when Kevin Hart talked about, I thought it was that he had to refocus, stand back and say, oh, wow, that's not what I should be paying attention to right now. It's something else that I need to hone, that I need to appreciate, that I need to engage with, sit with. And that takes time, right? It takes so much time. And each time he did that, I feel like he even elevated himself just a little bit more, which are those milestones that I just mentioned, and engaged himself and opened his heart to experience one more thing. One more thing. And then it happens again. It's a repeating pattern. I think you can probably think of times in your life too, right? Where you've repeated that pattern of achieving a milestone, kind of feeling like, okay, I have arrived a little bit. And then realizing that, well, I may have gotten a little closer, but I haven't quite arrived there yet. So what do I need to do differently? How do I need to think differently? What new muscles do I need to build? What new relationships do I need to have? Maybe I need to rest. How about that? Maybe I just need to take a beat. Maybe I need to sit with and really take in some of the things and be reflective about some of the things that I've, learned, experienced, instead of kind of rushing through it, right? And I feel like that to me was what he was describing, because he didn't say that he has made it yet either, right? He gave examples of after examples of where he's kept elevating himself, but he never said, oh, and I've made it now. He's still climbing. He is still climbing. And I think that to me is the biggest takeaway. You know, like people say, I'll go to sleep, I'll rest when I'm gone on to the next phase, right? As opposed to thinking that you're going to get that here. And that's kind of also some of our spiritual beliefs too, is that, you know, like the ultimate is not here on earth anyway.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The ultimate is not here on earth. And so I think it just kind of reinforces that work ethic and that goal orientation that we all have in us. And that's what, to me, he was demonstrating.
And it's so much there to unpack. And one of the things that resonated with me, and I'm reminded of from you speaking and then all the stories that were shared as a part of the documentary, was that God does not change his mind about the what.
The ultimate
None of
what?
that, the ultimate what.
Yeah.
So Kevin Hart was going to be a star. Now, how that went about happening, whether it was for Kevin, Don Cheadle described much the same thing, having to start one way and then ultimately going from, I'm not sure if this is going to work, I better go to professional waiter training. I didn't even know there was waiter school. He said, I went to waiter school.
Yep.
Right? To become a professional, just in case this wasn't going to work out. The what didn't change, the how was the part. I want to talk a little bit, pivot to pivots, because there was an echo of pivoting and having to have that flexibility as a part of the documentary. Whether you were someone like Morgan Freeman that was in his 50s before starting his career, whether you were someone like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson that had a whole career and path and trajectory you thought you were going to go on, and then found yourself doing something different, or having to pivot because, hey, I don't want to take those types of roles. And Denzel Washington talked about reaching out to Sidney Poitier. And boy, we can talk about mentorship a lot in this conversation as well. That was an echo. But reaching out to Sidney Poitier and saying, I'm not sure if I should take this type of role because there's a statement, there's something I want to say, there's a foundation I want to lay in my career. And should I be doing this type of work, or is this type of work, other type of work, going to serve me better? So as we find ourselves in this place where there's so many things that change for us, the world is so dynamic. What we thought we knew even mere weeks ago, we might find ourselves in a different reality today. And so for those folks that find themselves having to pivot, assuming that the statement I just said is true, the what doesn't change, but the how might take us in a direction that we didn't anticipate. How do we posture ourselves in those moments when we have to pivot? How do we protect our mind, our heart, and our spirit in those moments where we have to pivot? And how do we maximize and, make the most of those seasons where this didn't quite go? Jamie Foxx says, I thought I was going to be Lionel Richie, right?
He thought he was going to actually be a singer, right?
Right. And he is, and I ain't saying she's a gold digger. Right. So and he's done all of that. Yeah. And so so he's had just this tremendous amount of success in multiple genres. But that required some pivoting and shifting in a mindset where I thought my music was going to be my primary, and then it turned into acting being the primary. So how do we guard ourselves, our heart, our mind, our spirit? How do we maximize those moments where we find ourselves having to pivot and having to shift? Yeah,
that's such a juicy topic to me, because it is so juicy. There's this there's this theory called Theory U. It was created by this professor called Otto Scharmer. And when you think about it, just think about the concept of U, right? U-turn. right? The three tenets that are super important to this theory are having an open mind, a whole open heart, and an open will. And I think those are the three kind of basic fundamental, you know, skill sets, that we should think about when we're talking about creating some agility, ability to be flexible, and the ability to, move with wisdom when you need to. And if you don't have an open heart and an open mind and an open will, that's when you can get really stuck. Because a closed mind says, I thought I was going to take this path. What are you talking about? This path is closed. I'm going to barrel my way through this path that I thought I should take, right? Not really realizing or even caring that things have shifted. You're not even attuned to that because your mind is fixated, right? Having a fixed mindset on this is the path. When all of the cues say that path is not the path that you should be taking. In fact, it's closed. And you can be spending a lot of unnecessary time trying to barrel down that path that is clearly blocked. If you don't have an open heart, right? Your heart needs to be open to different ways of feeling, right? Your emotions about the pathway that you're going down. If you're fixed in, like, I'm fixed on my heart, my emotions say, this is where I'm supposed to go, then you're missing out on really, kind of opening your heart to other ways of thinking, other ways of being, even other people that are saying the wisdom that comes from other people that says, I think you need to be on this path. I'm trying to nudge you this way. That's super important. And so, like, when we talk about pivots, you need to have an open heart, open mind, and open will. And you get that by really practicing it, right? I don't think that any of the actors on the show, they didn't say that the first time they had to pivot, they did it well. None of them said that. Anytime a pivot is presented to us, I think the natural thing to do is to reject that, right? Because it goes against what we thought we should be doing in the first place. But after time and time, butting your head up against the wall, you say, this is an opportunity, right? For me to shift. And, going back again to kind of the spiritual practice, because, Jamila, like, we talk about these things a bit very behaviorally, but this is an inside game, right? All of this is an inner game. And what it really takes is for you to go back on the inside, right? Because that's where your heart, mind, and will reside, on the inside of you. And it takes a huge amount of, you mentioned vulnerability, but it takes a lot of faith for you to really take that step towards what may feel like the unknown. When I think about that, I think about Indiana Jones, right? Like, my sister Gina and I, we always talk about this example with Indiana Jones because it just resonated with us. Like, he has the bad people behind him. He's in the Temple of Doom. He's like right in front of like a huge like gulf, right? If he steps in over, he will literally fall into the abyss. But what he needs to do is get to the other side, right? He got to get over there some kind of way, because over there is the Holy Grail. Well, he's at a turning point here. He's got to do something. And you know that I love how they cinematically showed his thought, his what's happening in his head. He's like, I gotta do something. So he had to take a step. And when he had the faith to take the step, the bridge appeared, right? And I think that's what happens when we're at that crossword or at that vection point of pivot. It's we get to a place where we have to either go backwards or we have to take a leap of faith and step forward. And it's only when we take those steps that the bridge appears, where we see that actually the universe is conspiring in our favor, right? To be successful. And that on the other side of that step, there is an abundance of, maybe not abundance, but there is assurance that there are people that want to support us, that, you know, we will see signs, and it may be subtle signs, but signs that we're going in the right direction. And yes, that takes vulnerability. It does take, you know, a lot of, you know, guts, you know, and courage. And if you're fortunate and blessed to have a community, folks that are in your grandstand cheering you on, regardless of the roadblocks, they're not swayed by that. They encourage you through that, then hey, that's even better, right? But the pivots are going to happen because you know that one graphic about success, and it says, you know, we think success is from this point A to B, but really what happens is it goes like this. It's not scrambling, right? It's not straight. So if we think that, you know, it's like the more we help, especially young people, and ingrain upon in them that, you know, from one point to another point is never going to be a straight line, then I think we start to harness within them that, you know, flexibility and agility such that if they do get kind of to a point of pivot, that they don't fall apart. They don't lose faith, that they don't lose sight of their goal. Because like you said, your goal is going to still be the goal. It ain't changing. It ain't changing. And even when you think sometimes, like we look at all the folks that were highlighted in this film, and we say, oh, they've made it. It's like, you never make it. Because in your heart, you're always striving for more and more and more and more and more. So yeah, I think that those pivots happen. We should expect them to happen. We have to groom ourselves to have open hearts, open wills, and open minds to accept what comes. And also with that is, you know, one of the lessons that I've learned is that sometimes we say, you know, like we put our destiny in the hands of others and say that, you know, well, if they didn't get in my way, you know, if that didn't happen, if this person didn't do that, then I would have this. And that's given a whole lot of power to other people, in my opinion. And what we should be doing is being more like those who were in this film. They said, you know what? I'm going to bet on me. I'm going to have faith in myself. I'm going to hone my skills so that, you know, even if I do have to pivot, I have a plan B to put me on hold until, you know, until I can get back on my path, right? And I think that's what we should be doing all the time. Like that's the work. That's the work of leadership, you know, I think.
Wow. And Dr. Robin, I'm going to find a place for us to land the plane. This documentary was so rich.
It was.
And we could talk about the impact of Black Panther and that what that meant for actor after actor, whether they were in the film or viewed the film, what that level of representation meant. There were so many themes about overcoming, There were so many themes about community. Jamie Foxx even speaking about having his family live with him and having the value of keeping your personal community intact. The Rock talked about that as well, about making sure home was well before going out. But where I want to end our conversation is a word I threw out there earlier in the minutes we have remaining about mentorship. And I want to talk about Will Smith.
Okay.
Because this is not my observation. This is actually Rufus's observation. And for those listening, Rufus is my husband, Robin's longtime friend, more like a brother. They grew up together. I can't even say friend. But long time brother from another, and my husband. We were all sitting around talking. And one observation that Rufus had was the amount of powerful questions that Will Smith would ask.
Oof.
And so Will Smith, as an echo and as a leadership principle, talked about repeatedly the level of mentors, whether formal or informal, that he learned from. And when he got in the presence of those mentors, he always had a powerful question. Arnold Schwarzenegger, what do I need to do to be an international star?
Right.
I'm not going to go to Arnold and ask about something out of his wheelhouse, but I'm trying to get my movies played all over the world. You do that. How can I learn from that? Talked about sitting down with General Colin Powell. What steps did you need to take to become a general? What does that even mean?
What does it mean?
What does that even mean to become a general? And let me learn from Colin Powell that I need to be able to have a working, and I call it enough understanding to be dangerous about what everyone else does, but I leave the specialization and the specificity to those that are in the role. But it allows me to be not only a visionary, but it allows me to be the support system that I need to be to each of these folks, because I understand what all of their roles are. And so Will talked about just having these very powerful conversations, and what he learned from an Eddie Murphy. Whether Eddie Murphy is a formal or an informal mentor, he talks about unlike anyone else on the planet, Eddie Murphy's words are the words that I say on a repeated basis. I agree with that sentiment. Eddie Murphy's words have changed my vernacular. I don't go a week without saying, what is that, velvet? I don't go a week, without saying Hercules. I don't go a week. Right. He has literally changed my vocabulary, the way I describe things, the way that I interact and interface. Yeah. And so when we talk about utilizing mentors, whether formal or informal, whether they know they are our mentor or not, how can we make sure we maximize utilizing mentors and ask those really powerful questions once we get in the spaces of the people that might have the answers or the nuggets or the resource we might need for that season?
Yeah. That word mentorship, it can feel, there's been some allergic reaction, I would say, in the, in the arts. And not just the arts, but in the sports arena, right? From folks who are saying, like, that's not what I'm here to do. And so, maybe that feels a little heavy. I wonder if, using your platform and your power to influence and empower others, just kind of, contextualizing it a little bit more generally, as opposed to kind of saying this is a role, this is this heavy responsibility that you need to take on, And when I think about, like, utilizing your power, utilizing your platform, utilizing your influence to support, to build up, and to empower others, I think about the story that Lawrence Fishburne talked about. I think it was Lawrence Fishburne. Yes. And he said that, when he was a young kid on the film, right? And he was asked to do something and he had to do it 40 times. He had to repeat the scene 40 times and he still wasn't giving the director what, he wanted. But the number one on the call sheet, right? And do you remember who that
Martin
was?
Short.
Martin,
Martin Short.
Martin Short, Martin Sheen,
Martin Sheen.
Martin Sheen, Martin Sheen.
Martin Short is the comedian. Martin
Right.
Sheen. I watch Only Murders in the Building. Yes, that's why Martin Short was in my head. Go ahead. Martin Sheen. Yes.
Seeing the big picture,
yes,
cluing in to the emotion and how that experience was impacting the light in the eyes of one of his co-actors, co-stars, right? He spoke a word of encouragement that Lawrence Fishburne said saved his life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not hard to do. That was to me a very selfless act. It was also being aware of, the room, being aware of what's happening. You talked about different roles, different responsibilities on the set. To me, it signaled that he was paying attention to all of that and use his position, his platform, his influence, his status to speak empowerment into a young kid. I don't know if Lawrence ever told that story to Martin Sheen so that he could know that.
Yeah. I'm glad he's still here to know it now.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to me, that signaled the kind of what we can do in leadership roles that seemingly, from the outside in, it doesn't really look like it took a lot of effort, but, it had the biggest impact on this person's life. So that to me is the responsibility of those who are in the number one role. For those who are under that, right? I do feel like, one thing that I advise people who are looking for new jobs and leaders who are getting into new jobs. So, the one thing you should do is be clear about what you want to get out of this, right? And I think sometimes it's like we should think about that when we encounter people who we admire. What is one nugget that I can maybe kind of gain from this person? And as opposed to being we have to ground ourselves, make sure that we are in our bodies. And once we've kind of gotten over the shock of being in front of or in the midst of, in the company of someone who has, wisdom and, and experience, is to really think about what is the thing that I can gain from this person, and it may not always be a question. It may be an observation. But it may be like doing some research after you've talked to that person or encountered them. And you'd be surprised how people are open to you following up, because some people think, oh, I missed my shot. I missed my opportunity to talk to this person. But, I would do that. I think that that's something that I have to learn too. Like, how can I, I've not always taken advantage of those opportunities when I'm with leaders to really ask them questions and get their advice. But really, it takes courage to do that, but you never know what you're going to get from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it takes courage to step out and do something new and on the fly, like you and I did today. We went from concept in the conversation room off Crenshaw to let's go ahead and record. And I'm so excited to say that's a wrap on this episode of Real Leaders. We have to get back together, Robin, because there is a part 2.
Yes.
To number 1 on the call sheet with the women in Hollywood. And so we got to watch the episode with the men. The episode with the women is the next episode in the series. So we will come back together and talk about some leadership principles from that as well. And I think you do another movie, Indiana Jones, on the list. So I think that's 2 films that we have to come back and see. So thank you so much, Dr. Robin, for participating in this episode today, for your insight, for your leadership, for your guidance, and for sharing our private conversations publicly. There are so many gems and nuggets and tools that we all have in our toolbox today that we will be able to transition into the world of work, into our families, or wherever we find ourselves in a leadership capacity. And thank you to all of you that are listening, whether you're streaming with us, whether you're listening on any of the platforms where you find your podcast. So excited to have you as a part of this conversation of real leaders as we talk about leadership lessons from film, from your feeds, and from the front lines of everyday life. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to you tuning back in for the next episode.
Real leaders, lights, cam, truth in view, black actors lead. Now it's on you. Jamila's got the mic, let's go. Real leaders, welcome to the show.